So I trusted that if everybody did what they were supposed to, I don't even know how to get to that. That's not on my screen. Good. So I trusted that if I did my part, everything else would work. And that meant that I trusted somehow whenever you go out of the screen, it loses the. There we go. So I'm going to talk about the things I wished I had known now, then that I know now. I think I'm going to be stuck without the clicker. So today there are 500,000 kids in foster care. It went down to about 450 at one point. It's coming back up. 500,000 kids in foster care today. And there'll be 800,000 kids sometime this year. It's twice the number from the 1980s. The average child spends 2 years in foster care and goes through 3 different placements. 20% of the kids spend over 5 years in foster care. So if you apply that same ratio, that's about 7 or 8 placements for 20% of the kids. Well, that creates a problem because if you've ever spent a day in foster care, your odds of completing college are less than 2%. Within 12 months of the study that was done for foster care alumni, over half were diagnosed with major mental health disorders. 25% with PTSD, twice the rate of Vietnam vets, twice the rate of Afghanistan vets. If you think about it, that makes some sense. If you talk to kids in foster care, they don't feel valued, they don't feel safe, they don't know who the enemy is, they don't feel in control. Very much the story that vets tell. So it shouldn't surprise us that 25% were diagnosed with PTSD. 20% were diagnosed with a major depression, 17% with social phobia. They had a higher unemployment rate, 17% were on public assistance, 33% at or the poverty line, 33% with no health insurance. So when I started, I thought foster care was the neutral. I thought foster care was the safe option. We used to use foster care just in case. Until we can figure out what's going on with this family, we'll put them someplace safe. Until we get to the bottom of this. Well, the research now makes it pretty clear that kids get harmed more often in licensed stranger care than they do in unlicensed kin care. Foster care is not a neutral or a safe option. But that's if they've ever spent a day in foster care. 23,000 kids will age out of the system this year. That's not a bubble. That number's been between 20,000 and 28,000 kids every year for the last 15 years. This is a predictable outcome of our foster care system. Well, aging out carries risks. I'd like to think that when I was 18, I didn't need to listen to anybody else. I am so lucky I had people who are going to share with me what they were thinking, whether or not I wanted to hear it. But what happens if you don't have that? What happens if you don't have somebody who's there to help you learn from your mistakes? What happens if you don't have somebody who said, I believe in you, I know you can do this. I served on the Pew Commission on Children in Foster Care, and one of the young people we talked to told us that he'd try and he'd screw up, and he'd try and he'd screw up, and he'd try and he'd screw up. So he just decided he was a screw up. So why try? You don't have somebody who can tell you they believe in you and mean it. How do you learn to believe in yourself when you keep failing? How do you keep getting back up when life knocks you down? Because life is not kind. Life has kind moments. If you're lucky, life has kind people. But life isn't going to treat you with kid gloves. Life knocks you down. You've got to learn to get up. And how do you do that if you don't have people saying, you can do it, I believe in you, lean on me for as long as you need, but I know that you can do it. $23,000 kids aging out of foster care, over 60%, almost 2/3, be homeless, in jail, or dead within 2 years of leaving the system. When I started, our goal was simply to get kids to 18. We figured if we got them to 18, we were successful. 2/3 homeless, in jail, or dead within 2 years does not sound like success to me. And yet this is a predictable part of the outcome of our system. It's not a bubble. For those of you who saw just in the last couple of weeks, there was a long article in USA Today about failure of adoptions. Sort of the dirty secret. People used to think, well, we get these kids adopted, they live happily ever after. Well, the report from USA Today would suggest otherwise, that a large number of those kids, particularly kids who come out of the foster care system, end up back in there. And yet, adoption is a preferred outcome for our cases. But the biggest problem that I encountered, the things that give me nightmares, are the personal stories of the kids. In the Pew Commission, we talked to one young man who was 16 years old, and he told us that every day he came home from school to his foster home. First thing he did was look to see if his stuff was packed on the front door. And take garbage bags. Because who's the last person to get notice of the move? The kid. Who's the one who's least prepared for the move? The kid. Who gets the least amount of help adjusting to the move? The kid. Who has the most at stake? The kid. As adults, we know that whatever our plan is for today, for tonight, something might change. We have a family member who needs something. We have a friend or a neighbor. We might need to change our plans. But how would it be to be 16 years old and not know in here where you're going to spend the night? Have that be the way that you look at every night. What does that do for you when you're 16? Yes?
I just want to share that I'm so glad I came here because I'm a former foster youth. Everything you're sharing on here was me. I got my bachelor's, I got my master's. I'm only 26 on 30. So I had to work really, really hard, right? Group homes, foster home shelters. And when you talk about the decision making of like the people that are in charge of our lives, it's so true. I remember being in San Francisco, I moved there for college. I went with a 1996 Ford Taurus, $10 a night, literally right from fun. I was telling my social worker, hey, I really need to get involved in a program that's going to help me. She was literally in my apartment telling me that program is for the foster youth that can't get out of bed every morning. What that told me, now that I'm a policy analyst, is they have that idea that we need to hit rock bottom, we need to be homeless, we need to be jobless in order to get support. Right, in order to get help, really it's those proactive efforts, it's listening to you and hearing out what they need. And I'm just really glad I'm here because you're touching it all, you're literally touching it all, even my cat, I would put on there like 2% of foster youth graduates in college, it's hard. I did not have a cheerleader, I was my own cheerleader.
Yeah,
But
but
I'm glad I'm here because I got my semester together and I've been able to work with so many other youth that I've experienced the same thing.
and for you to be able to succeed, you had to be exceptional.
Absolutely. I have to stand out when everyone else.
What about the kids who are not exceptional? What about just the regular kids? Why shouldn't they have the same options? In the Pew Commission, we encountered a pair of twin girls who were 17 years old. They'd been in foster care since they were 12, and they had been separated because they couldn't get placed together. There's not a single social, psychological, or safety reason why not. They lived 20 miles down the road from each other, and they had not seen each other in over 2 years. The only reason they even saw each other is that when the Pew Commission came to town, the staff would come in advance, talk to a few young people. One of their last questions was, the commission wants to hear from a number of people. Is there somebody you can recommend? And this young girl said, how about my sister? So the staff brought the two girls together. First time in 2 years they'd seen each other. And they only lived 20 miles down the road from each other because it did not rise to the level of being important enough to somebody who could make a decision and do something about it. Not even the question of whether they should have been placed together, which I hope is so clear that nobody questions that. The longest relationship you have in your life is your siblings. Particularly then with twins. We talked to a young man who was going to age out of the foster care system in 3 months. So he was 17 years old, 9 months. He had run away 20 times in the previous 24 months. They always found him at his older brother's house. So do you think there was a plan for him to age out and go into his brother's house? No, somebody deemed their brother to be an inappropriate placement. Well, give me a break. Where do you think he was going? He told us he voted with his feet. And if his brother's house was such a bad place, shouldn't they have at least set up a safety plan as a backup? But the system said, no, we don't want to deal with them. So they didn't. But the one that still gives me nightmares was a 19-year-old young woman, small, petite, blonde woman, who told us she'd been put in foster care at 2. She bounced in and out of high-intensity placements. When she was 13, her foster care worker told her she would never, ever have a family. She graduated out of foster care at 18. She told us she was getting married next month, but had nobody to walk her down the aisle. The things that we take for granted for our kids, why aren't these kids entitled to the same thing? If we're going to take them away from their parents and their families, doesn't that put an obligation on us? And shouldn't that standard be at least what we would do for our own kids? Instead of, oh, well. So the questions that I kept hearing were, where do I go for Thanksgiving dinner? Where is there a present for me under a Christmas tree? Who comes to my graduation or my wedding or the birth of my first child? For 23,000 of these kids every year, the answer is no one. And what's the layman's definition of insanity? You do the same thing over and over and hope for a different result? Well, let me tell you, hope is not a strategy, and some days not a plan. We need to do something different today. So that's what resilience that I'm talking about is, a different approach to try and break that trauma cycle. Because you know that the two highest correlates for people in prison, it's not proof points because it's too hard to establish proof. Two highest correlates for people in prison, one is foster care. The other is lack of empathy. Where do you learn empathy? Where do you learn to care about somebody besides yourself? In a family. I love it when my 4-year-old grandson is worried about, is his 8-year-old sister going to get a popsicle just like he did? He's worried about, is she going to get treated fairly? If he's 4 years old and he's worried about his sister, that's a win. But you learn that in family. You don't learn that in foster care. If you're lucky, you learn how to take care of yourself. So this is where Western knowledge, Western science, and tribal traditional knowledge meet up. Western science has finally gotten to the point where they recognize that relationships are important. And that's what resilience is. So let me show you the patterns of stress. We know, for example, that the stress is predictable, moderate, controllable. Resiliency comes from surviving that stress, learning control, gaining a sense of mastery. But when that resilience is when that trauma is unpredictable, it's extreme or it's prolonged, resiliency gets hijacked. And instead we end up with an increase in the risk of medical complications, mental health issues, basically all the things that we know from ACEs. And then the secondary trauma for the people who work with the system. You want to help and you can't help. You tend to then burn out, or you tend to put professional distance between you and the person you're trying to help. So instead of connectedness, we get distance. And we know relatedness is not about trust. It's not trust me, I'm on your side. Foundation of all relationship is being understood. Somebody who understands without you having to explain. I can remember even in my setting, trying to explain what I was thinking to somebody who was from a different culture. It got exhausting. How do you explain as a young person to people who aren't already positioned to understand? And one of the things that they said was, when you're understood, you're home. People know who you are. You don't have to be like your brother or sister, but we know who you are. My two daughters are very different. I've taught one to ski. I figured it'd be easy to teach the second one. So I tried the same method. Not even close. They're different people, but they were understood. They're accepted for who they were. So if you have a traumatic event, you have traumatic impact, unless you have some resiliency factors that intervene. And as those factors get smaller, the impact gets bigger. But if the resiliency factors grow, then the impact becomes less. This is okay. How do I put that? Okay. So the idea of a resiliency court is not tied to a physical court. It's not a drug court. It's not tied to services or programs, and it's not tied especially to compliance. Because too often our child welfare system has tied itself to compliance. That this plan is the only path to you getting your kids back. Except, how do we then explain the states that say failure to follow the plan is independent grounds to terminate parental rights, even if you make all the changes you're supposed to make? One of my last cases at the Court of Appeals, 2 different child welfare cases hit my desk at the same time. One was a woman who followed her case plan, completed it, but didn't make the changes that somebody thought was appropriate, so they terminated. Another was a woman who made all the changes, but didn't complete the case plan, and they terminated. Our system is based on compliance and the idea that the only way is to prove that you're a morally fit person by following the plan we give you, instead of recognizing that families are different, people are different, the context is different, and all we should want is success, not compliance. So the purpose of the Resiliency Court is to focus on the success of the families. Build on those successes. So we're trying to train judges in understanding ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study and Trauma. And for example, Dr. Folletti, who was the godfather of the ACEs studies here in San Diego, he has now acknowledged that removal into foster care is an ACE. It's one more point on that score of trauma. So when we make a decision to move a child into foster care, we are basically imposing new trauma on that child. Now, sometimes foster care may be necessary, but it shouldn't be the first option or the second option. It should be the last resort, like amputating. You don't amputate your knee because you might get cancer in your foot. You do everything else, even after the cancer shows up, before you get around to amputating. But our system is built around 4E of the Social Security Act. It's a $9 billion pot of money. That money is tied to foster care. So when a state wants to do preventive services, they pay 90% of that cost. If the state does foster care, the feds pay between 80 and 90% of the cost. So where do you think the state builds their array of services? Around the federal money, which is tied to foster care. So I can remember having arguments with colleagues about, we got to keep this family together. And their response is, we need to put them in foster care so we can get them help. That's back-ass words. We got to be busting our tails to keep them together and move them into foster care only if everything we can possibly imagine and try didn't work. So the goal is to heal. It's not compliance with a plan. It's not a social worker's view of what your plan ought to be or a judge's order. It's what's necessary to heal. And that healing then inoculates against future problems. Because the one thing certain about life is there's another surprise coming around the corner for you. And if your fallback system is the child welfare system as a safety net, you're in trouble. So the goal of the Resiliency Court is to create a safety net that's individualized around each family. So you start getting judges to ask questions about not just how are you doing in school, but who do you miss? Who's important in your life? Who would you like to see? And the red flag is if they don't have anybody, then we know there's a problem and we need to get to work immediately to build those relationships. So Dr. Bob Segi from Tufts University Hospital in Boston has an analogy that he uses to explain trauma and resilience. He said, imagine that you have a house in a meadow, tall grass in the meadow surrounding your house. It's the end of summer and it's all dried out. And there's a grass fire coming at you. That's the trauma. That's the crisis in your life. Behind your house, sitting on a little hill, is a tank of water. Use the child welfare example. That tank is filled with good experiences, not Disneyland dad level experiences, although those don't hurt. But it's a hug when you get off the school bus, dad reading you a bedtime story, grandma baking cookies. All those experiences fill that tank. And you've got to continually fill that tank because life happens, evaporation. The water doesn't just sit there forever, it evaporates. So you got to constantly refill that tank to keep it ready. Then there's a fire hose that comes down from that tank down to your house, and you have the nozzle in your hand. Think about every trauma that happened in that person's life. That's a hole in that hose. And then epigenetics teaches us that trauma can be passed across generations. So all the epigenetic trauma are holes on that hose. You patch those holes with a positive relationship. Every positive relationship you have is a patch on that hose. So you want to patch every one of those holes, and it doesn't hurt to have a couple extra patches in your back pocket. Now you have the raw materials to fight that crisis. You have the good experience, you have the relationship patched hose. Now you're ready for the services. Because now you need to have somebody teach you how to fight that fire. Because if you're spraying that water up in the air, you're not doing any good. So that's the role of services. Somebody to teach you how to use your raw materials in a way that you can fight that crisis, that you can deal with that crisis. But it doesn't do any good to have the skills if you don't have anything in the tank. It doesn't do any good to have skills if you have no water pressure because of all the trauma that has happened. So we need to make sure that they have the raw materials, and then we can start to train them how to use those materials to survive the crisis. And we know that relationships are key to resilience. Relationships, it's not a program, it's not a theory, it's not a set of services. It's relationships are key to creating resilience. So tribal traditions have recognized all along who you related to. One of my favorite programs calls itself My Two Aunties. Because who is your auntie? Your auntie is somebody who put their arm around you, wash your clothes, feed you, give you a place to sleep. But she's also not afraid to grab you by the ear and shake her finger in your face if that's what you need. But you know she's there for you. She's on your side. She's not going to give you a free pass, but she's got your back. Relationships. So that tribal program does their work with the community based on relationships. You're all my family. What would I do for you? If my kids or my grandkids ended up in the child welfare system, I would move heaven and earth and or kidnap them and get them out of there. But I'd move heaven and earth to get them what they needed. Now, how can I look myself in the mirror and say, I demand that for mine, but yours can just get reasonable efforts, if you're lucky? If I'm going to demand that for mine, I should be demanding that for every child who's in the system. That's the idea behind applying ICWA to all kids. We're not disadvantaging kids the way the plaintiffs in Brackeen are talking about because ICWA applies to them. What we ought to be doing is applying that to every child. Active efforts, family connections, community support. That ought to be something we do every child. Where we take care of children, all my relations. So a number of tribes I've worked with and talked to around the country, most of them have a tradition that if there are children who are in need, the community steps up, even if they're not their children. If the children are in need, we step up. What would it be like to have a child welfare system like that? California, you're lucky enough to have customary adoptions as an option. You don't have to terminate parental rights in order to have day-to-day caregivers on a long-term basis. Tribal traditions, Western science finally have gotten to the point. And we know ACEs and trauma underlie many of the problems in child welfare. There's that intergenerational response to trauma, epigenetics, ACEs. And we know the child welfare system, particularly the courts, doesn't have great success in returning children home. The most successful state I think I've seen returns 50% of the kids home. Did you send your kids to summer camp if you knew only half of them were going to come home? Would you go to the hospital with your kids when they were sick if you know there was a 50-50 chance they were going to die no matter what the cause was? Can you trust a system that says, oh, we'll flip a coin to decide if you're going to get your kids back? 50-50 odds? That's for the good systems. Resiliency allows survivors, child abuse and neglect to reclaim a positive trajectory, to build their own support system around themselves, where they don't have to rely on social workers and judges. They don't have to rely on agencies. And if you're a parent, most of the parents we encounter are not great problem solvers, or they wouldn't have been in the system. So let's say mom has a job at McDonald's. Babysitter's sick and calls in. What do you do with your 4-year-old? If you miss your shift at McDonald's, you're out. You leave your child home alone, somebody finds out you've lost your child. You bring your child to work, you probably lost both your job and your child. So what do? None of us gets through life alone. We all have a support system, people who have helped us out. That should be the goal of our child welfare system, is build that support system around mom or dad. So the next crisis that happens, they don't need us. They have their family and their friends around them who can step up and help. One size fits all system just doesn't make any sense. Even the medical people have recognized that. The one size fits all, I've looked at thousands of case plans in my career. There's not a nickel's worth of difference. Domestic violence assessment, domestic violence counseling, substance abuse assessment, substance abuse counseling, mental health assessment, mental health counseling, get a job, stay out of trouble, make your appointments, make it to court, pay your child support. Visit. Did I miss anything? Doesn't matter what got you in this system. You have to do all those things to get out. Well, I've had, again, colleagues argue, well, it doesn't hurt. That's a bumper to bumper checkup. We're just trying to help. Well, let me tell you, a family that's in trauma or stress, one more thing is that straw that broke the camel's back. Let's focus on what's necessary to keep them safe. Then we can work on all the rest. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I mean, for those of you who had teenage children, think of the first day of summer. You give them a list of 10 things that you want to have them do during the week. At the end of that week, how many have they gotten done? Probably 0, maybe 1. Because it overwhelms them. They don't know how to do that. So what do? You say, okay, you're done. Your summer's over. Or do you help them problem solve and learn how to do it? So the first week you do 1. The next week you do 2. Next week you do 3. And when they stumble at 4, you back up and you problem solve. So now you're doing 4 and 5. What makes us think that these parents don't need that same kind of help? Instead of a 14-point case plan that they have to complete, let's focus on 1 and get that success going and then build on that. And the one-size-fits-all plan. Think about taking your kids or your grandkids to the doctor. You don't expect the receptionist to say, oh, the doctor doesn't need to see your kids. 80% of the kids she saw last week had a cold. Take them home, put them to bed, feed them lots of liquids, they'll be fine. Would we put up with that? No, we want an individual assessment of what's going on. We don't get that in the child welfare system very often. It's one size fits all. And then on top of that, if it doesn't work, you go back to the doctor and say, doctor, I gave the little girl her medicine for the 5 days or the 10 days it said, and she's not any better. How often does the doctor respond with, I know why it didn't work. You didn't believe in it. You didn't engage. No, we want the doctor to try something else. But our child welfare system doesn't do that. Our child welfare system blames people when our plan for them didn't succeed. Christine. And who's not a problem solver with a professional degree and a support system and resources.
I was just going to piggyback off her. My nephew had the same issue too, and the doctor would say, "Oh, they're sick and kept the fever and had infection and everything." But I was listening to you and what you talked about the resources and people around you. What I had to do was contact people that we know from our culture, Black doctors, Black nurses.
Somebody who'd listen.
In my community to help us, because going to the doctor.
And that's the response that our child welfare system generally gives. Now, I'm not saying it's 100%, because clearly there are amazing people out there. But it's not the run of the mill. But part of that was your persistence and your resources and your ability to cut through the BS. And when there's a power differential, even if you have those things, it doesn't always work well. So the goal of our system that we're trying to build is healing instead of compliance. And that means there has to be a shift to real listening and learning about the family. And as a judge, I can tell you that there are not many of my colleagues who are good at listening. They're good at ordering. They're good at enforcing orders. But how many listen to the family? Most of those families are not in denial. They know there's a problem. They're afraid, they're ashamed, they're guilty, or they're just scared. But if you start to listen, then you're going to differentiate them from the background noise. What is it about this family that has a strength I can build on? What is it about this family that a little bit of leverage here could make a huge difference? What about this person makes them unique? So that you create an individualized plan for assistance, not a one-size-fits-all. You understand the context of each family and you adjust as you go. No plan is perfect. Even the US military understands that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Reality imposes its own agenda on a plan. And yet we hold those parents to that plan instead of saying, okay, what's working and what's not working? What do we need to reprioritize? What do we need to do differently to help you succeed? No, it's you signed on to this plan. That's it. You succeed in keeping your kids or not based on keeping to this plan. Even though we know reality requires adjustments, changes, priorities, seizing opportunities, walking around a hurdle instead of just forcing yourself to keep jumping up and falling down. Find another way to succeed. So in 2021, we got an urban court system, Wayne County, Detroit. I got several judges and referees there. A suburban system in Washtenaw County, which is Ann Arbor. We got the lead judge and referees, and we got 3 tribal court judges to be our guinea pigs for this resiliency court effort. And we trained them through a series of Zoom meetings because we were all in the pandemic. So we did hour and a half Zooms once or twice a month on trauma, on brain science, ACEs, visitation, resilience, the ABA safety model, parent partners, all kinds of things. And the idea was to shift the professional's approach. Rather than structuring it differently, changing the process of decision-making. What's our goal? Our goal is not compliance with the plan. Our goal is getting the kids safely home. What is interfering with that? Okay, let's focus on that effort. So we try to provide the judges with knowledge on brain science, trauma, best practices, stats, alternative approaches. And then we did something different. We started to train judges on motivational interviewing. How to have a conversation when there's a power differential. Because it's real easy to sit in that black robe up on that bench and say, do you understand what I'm telling you? Now, what's that person going to say? They may not even say anything out loud. They're not in their head, even if they have no clue what you said, because they know the consequences if they say, no, I didn't understand. You don't need a judge getting in your case. And when we're in trauma, our ability to listen and hear changes. If you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have cancer, most of us lose the ability to hear what comes next because we're still processing that. So imagine your mom who's just lost her kids into foster care and she comes to the judge and the judge says, I want to help. Just do these things and you get your kids back. How much did mom understand of that conversation? How much of the conversation did the judge understand? Or is the judge just talking to himself or herself? So one of the things we try to do is train those judges on the brain science. Here are the 4 levels of the brain. Judges, you're operating here. The families in trauma and stress here. You need to understand where they are. If you talk to them at this level, it's going to go right past them. So you've at least got to understand where they are and adjust. Because after all, who are the professionals in this relationship? Who are the ones who are trained to help? You don't get to say, and that's it. Same thing when I was a judge on the bench. I'd explain the rights to criminal defendants. If all I'm going to do is repeat a series of words, they're going to nod their head. And if they're a first timer, they got no clue what's going on and they're scared to death. And they didn't get what I told them. So I have to figure out how to make it less threatening. Make it easier and test. Did you understand that? Tell me what it is I just explained to you. When you get out and you don't remember this, where are you going to go to have somebody explain this to you? Okay. So we had to train the judges to listen to the families and engage them and then learn about those families. Because each family is different. Not every family of a substance abuser is the same. Not the reason they got into substance abuse is the same. Not the reasons that prevent them from getting out is the same. And yet our system tends to categorize people by the pathology. You're a drug abuser, so you need to go do this program. You have an anger problem, you need to go do that program. You have a mental health problem, you need to go see those people. Doesn't matter what got you there or whether it works or not. One of the things I try and explain to people, you can have the very best substance abuse program in the world. And if it's in Bosnia, it's not going to work. You got to match it to the people so that then becomes effective. Believe in the families and then create the plan with the families and adjust to it because the goal is more success for the families. So what we're doing is we're expanding the training. We're going to have 3 20-minute. Yes, go ahead.
So this is one of my things I've been thinking about with people who are families who are coming from a bad place and from a place of in the power structure, away from power.
Okay.
And that storytelling being very important to marginalized people, and storytelling not being very important to people who are not marginalized. So I was wondering about, and there was something that was clear, very discussion about storytelling. I just wondered if storytelling, listening to the stories is part of it.
Well, listening is a part, but it's also asking the questions and then listening to the answer. So that rather than engaging mom in all of the failures that she did, tell me the thing that you're proudest about as a parent. How did that make you feel? How did that make your child feel? What would you like to do more of about that? And then pretty soon you get mom bragging about what she can do. Then it's next set of questions would be, okay, what's the next step you want to take to be an even better parent? What's the next hurdle that you think you have to get past? Okay, what do you need to get past that? Rather than me telling you, you need to do this, you tell me, what do you need to succeed? You have a problem with housing? Okay, what do you got? What do you need? Well, you know there's a housing program, but you don't know how to access it. Okay, let me hook you up with somebody. If in a week they haven't helped you, come back and we'll find out somebody else who can help you. But part of that is engaging in a give and take, where as a judge, I don't set their priorities. I listen. I figure out where can I plug people in to help. And as they succeed or they fail, that will change. So in a courtroom, you're not going to have an hour and a half to tell a story. But you do have a chance to ask questions and then say, okay, if you think you need this, I'm not sure I believe in that, but let's try that first. What do you need to make that work for you? Well, I need to be able to get some job training. Okay. Have you tried that before? Yes. What went wrong? Okay, we'll know not to do it that way. What would you like to do? So that you start to problem solve with people by listening. And that's very different than a judge who says, here's your plan. And if you don't do it, the state has your kids. Nobody likes to be told what to do. I mean, my brother and I take turns trying to be the most honorary person in our family. You tell me what to do? Okay, make me. But if you could engage somebody in problem solving, so our idea is to try and spread that. So we're going to put these videos up on the Supreme Court website. We're going to take a cadre of judges through those. Once a month, we're going to have the expert who did those talk with the judges, answer their questions, problem solve with them. We found that the hour and a half segments were too long because calendars always ran long and they're getting ready for their next calendar. And we had people drop off. So if we made 3 or 4 20-minute segments for them to consume during the month and then talk to the expert. So I've recruited people that I know, since this is my baby. One of the things about the pandemic is they left me unsupervised for about 1.5 years. So I got to do what I wanted to do, and that was to create this resilience court, change the mindset. So I recruited the people I knew and trusted. So for example, Dr. Martinez in the back is one of our experts. He's going to do a 3 20-minute segment on what a resilient system ought to look like. We have others talking about the science of resilience. We have another one talking about brain science and trauma. We have another one talking about the ABA safety model. And then we have one teaching judges how to do motivational interviewing, how to listen and not focus on the wrong stuff. And the idea is eventually, hopefully we can add attorneys and social workers so we get a whole team of people. So I'm going to play this, if it works.
Just to set the table, all of you should know that we are here to begin a new process that we think will be revolutionary in terms of how we approach child welfare cases, in terms of how we can empower families to make them resilient. That's why we're calling it the Resiliency Court.
It's been between 20,000 and 30,000 kids every year for the last 15 years graduate out of foster care. If that happens, 60% of those kids will be homeless, in jail, or dead within 2 years. What can disrupt that number, though, are relationships.
What we want to do is create a center that is called our courts. By utilizing a resiliency court method, we can empower families for future challenges that they may face, where they don't necessarily have to fall back into the old patterns. And it is through your participation, your leadership in your respective courts that will allow us to begin this pilot program.
if I'm a judge, which I'm far from a judge, but if I'm a judge, I'm going to say to somebody and look at somebody and say, you know, this has got to be really intimidating for you to come in here. That here we are up here and I've got all this power. This has got to feel really uncomfortable for you. And I know when I feel uncomfortable, I'm on edge. And I want to appreciate that it's harder to hear when you're on edge. I want to be able to try and help create some safety for you to create more comfort.
How a judge is making their decision and what they're making their decision on does have a ripple effect, even if people don't buy in or they don't believe in it. They aren't going to get what they want if they're acting in ways or focusing in ways that are contrary to what we're trying to achieve.
One of the mistakes that I made as a judge is expecting the therapist to fix the problem. The therapist may be a part of a solution. But as a judge, we can be asking, who else is in your life? We can ask the social worker, what steps have you done to try and facilitate building a network around these parents? We can ask the youth, who is it that you miss? Who are you connected to? And the red flag warning comes up if they're not connected to anybody. Then we need to build those connections.
We're humanizing the experience of our kids and families versus dehumanizing. And dehumanizing is when we use power to try and create change, versus if we use safety and relationship to be able to come to you and you come to me, human to human. And our systems, unfortunately, and not just the court system, the DHS system, the CMH system, can be so dehumanizing that I just want to be seen, just as somebody walk out and say, I felt seen and heard in that courtroom. And that is so critical because it moves us as two human beings coming together to achieve what certainly is the well-being of your child.
If we think a certain way, we start to act a certain way. And if we act a certain way, it becomes habit. And if it becomes habit, it becomes us.
Gentleness and kind persuasion win where force and power fail. And as we think about this shifting to a resiliency court, this idea of power that certainly judges have, referees have, the system has, is that we're going to use our power to change you. We know doesn't work, and yet it's so easy to fall into that seduction of power. I will make this happen.
We can't protect the kids from the world. Problems will always arise. We don't want to put them in active danger. We don't want to subject them to unnecessary harm, but we cannot protect them from the world. But what we can do is we can equip them to survive it, to deal with it, to cope with it. And we know what builds resilience.
Allow the person in front of you to make the argument for change. Remember we talked about that remap, this idea of resiliency through equipping people, motivating people, helping them develop clear action plans, and eventually connect to people. This is around the motivational side.
I think a lot of this is kind of like parenting. Like you can sit and lecture your kids all you want and you probably won't see much result. But if you can somehow get them to come up with the idea and own it as theirs, then it just makes our job so much easier. The outcome is so much better.
Because this is something new and different to the culture, you may get a little pushback from institutionalists.
Yeah, but this takes more time. Yeah, but sometimes people will go off the rails and they'll just keep blaming someone else. Yeah, but I'm not a therapist. Well, what would it take for us to change our perspective a little bit? Like, what would it take to slow down and say, to ask family members about their motivation, their reason, their vision, so that they own it?
So I think, Judge, you have a tremendous role to direct those involved to not say, all right, we've got to build resiliency in these parents only so that they can get their kid back. Absolutely. But simultaneously, how and what are you doing as a caseworker, as a system, beyond just saying he's in therapy? Therapy, to me, doesn't describe resiliency. And so if he's in therapy, how are these areas being addressed?
With this resiliency approach, there is a natural element of cultural humility that you will learn that will foster better understanding and better communications with families in your courtroom.
For those of us who are making those decisions on the bench, when we have not come from populations that have been marginalized, we can't possibly even understand what that's about. And so the challenge for us is to really focus in early on. And one of the things we've been talking about trying to do is really focus in on the origin story before we get to whatever the issue is. What is the story of this person? What's the story of their family? What is that history? And more important than anything else, that we hear it so that we're thinking about it.
I absolutely see value. All that you've learned from that and how it connects into these theories is really interesting to me. So I'm all about it. Whatever I can do to help with training, if we want to try to measure it somehow, whatever I can do, whatever you want my role to be, I'm very happy to be part of this.
So we made this video based on the YouTube trainings, Zoom trainings that we did last year. All the experts donated their time. Judges donated their time. The idea is that people got frustrated with the fact that they weren't making a difference. They're just processing cases. They wanted to do something different. So this resilience approach, it's not going to cure everything for everybody. But we did recognize that one-off training doesn't last. So we tried to set it up to do multiple sessions, recorded so they can go back and review it. One of the referees tried to implement some of these principles and she was having difficulty. So because it was online, I could watch a hearing, gave her some suggestions on how to do things differently. The next hearing, she did it differently. She said she accomplished more in 1 hour with mom than she had in a year and a half before that. Because she reordered things to start with. Normally, judges start with the worker. Okay, tell me how mom's doing. Then the attorney general, tell me how the case is going. Before they get done, mom is defensive. Because all they've done is talk about the deficiencies. How often can you have this, people talk about how bad you are before you just get fed up with it? So the referee did something different. She told them, you'll have your chance, but I'm going to start differently. So she started with mom, along the lines of what we talked about. Mom, tell me what your best memory is of being a parent. What did you have the most fun doing? Mom, how do you want to become a better parent? By the time this was done, one of the attorneys who had always been critical of mom was praising her in the courtroom for the things that she had done. It turned the dynamic around. The referee said, I still don't know if mom's ever going to be able to get the kids home, but I can now see mom can have a role in their life. All from doing it differently. One time it changed the orientation. So it's not a one size fits all again. It's not going to work for everybody, but we're failing so many people now that maybe a different approach could be helpful. So what we do is we're trying to use that hope model. What gives a person hope is confidence. Well, how do you establish confidence? So there's not just a blind hope. I hope I'm going to be in the World Series someday. I hope I'm going to have an NBA championship ring. That's not real hope. Well, to give confidence, you got to have a credible plan. How am I going to get there? And to have a credible plan, what do I need to do? How do I need to work that plan? But even that's not enough because I need to work the plan and build on the little successes. And every little success gives me a little more confidence that I can hope that I have a future. But in order to have a credible plan, you need to understand the client and the context. So it's not about what did you do, it's about what brought you to this place today. Not the full story, but what brought you to this place? How did you wind up here? Because if I understand that, then I'm much more likely to help figure out with you, what do you need to succeed? So that we can chart a different path rather than me just saying, well, you're a substance abuse user, so you're going to complete this 12-step program over here, and I'm going to have you drug tested over there, and I'm going to have you do that. It's much better to have a conversation about, okay, where do you want to start? You know what you need to do, at least a couple of the steps. Where do we start? Let's start now. Let's not start when there's 3 months from now when you finally get the program. What are we going to do now? So that you get the other people there. So you can have the same plan. Same issue, but some people succeed and some people don't succeed. Well, what our system tends to do is say, well, that's because you're a bad parent. You're a bad person. You're not trying. You're not engaged. Instead of saying, maybe for some people there are lift factors and for some people there are drag factors. And if we can identify those, we can cut the drag factors and increase the lift factors. But it's individual. It's not one size fits all. So if we understand what brought them to this place, then we can start to build on that resilience. And we know that historically, different people from different backgrounds don't come to a situation advantaged in the same way. What you find as your context makes a difference for how much you're willing to trust, how much energy you're willing to put into it, and how much the service providers think that you can succeed. So if we understand it's a human being, like all of us, they're flawed, but like all of us, there's redeeming qualities as well. How do we build on those? So we try and get the judges to validate, not to deny. So when somebody says, I hate the system, I don't trust you all, I love my kid, but this is a terrible process, my natural reaction is, you're going to tell me that you don't want to trust what I'm doing? Well, we're going to have it out right here and now. How productive do you think that is? Not very. But if I was listening, I heard you say you love your kid. That's something I can build on. I heard in the middle of all that you love your kid. Well, I hope that's actually right. So when you love your kid, what do? How do you show your kid that you love them? What would you be willing to do for your kid when you love them that way? It's the beginning of a conversation. So somebody says, I want my kids back. I know I screwed up. It'll never happen again. It's hard being me. Just so tired. I hate the blankety blank classes you're putting me through. Those goddamn classes waste my time. Plus, I hate you sitting up there judging me. You're not better than me, but I'll do what I have to get my kids back. How do you respond? Well, you start to decode that into red talk and green talk. And you begin to focus at the beginning on the green talk. What's the positive? What can I build on? Well, you know you screwed up and you want your kids back. We can build on that. We can build on the fact that you want your kids back. I don't have to confront you about all the red talk that was in there. That's for another day. Let's get started on the green talk. Let's start solving that. I didn't mean to hit him. I would never do that. That wasn't the real me. I just had too much to drink, for losing my job. I'm just so tired of everything. I screwed up and it'll never happen again. This program is ridiculous. If you just get out of my hair, everything would be fine. We don't need you. I love my child and that's what he needs, me, not some stranger. What's the red talk and what's the green talk? The green talk, I can begin to focus on. We can have a conversation about how do we get there. Red talk we'll deal with that before this is over. But we don't need to have a beatdown as the first day together. We need to start making a plan that you could participate in, that you helped guide and create. Because if you say it yourself, it's not just a stranger saying it. If you've said it, then there must be some validity to it. So I could say, you should really drink less. You need anger management. And the response is, well, I don't need to listen to that judge. That judge doesn't know me, he doesn't understand me, doesn't know where I came from. I'm too old to get lectures like this. Or you focus on them saying, I need to drink less, I need to get anger management skills. Okay, how do we do that? So it's about putting out the dots and then being able to connect them. I know that you love your child. Tell me what Johnny means to you. Tell me how important he is to you. Give them a chance to tell their story about their connection to their child, because that's the only motivation that's going to get them where they need to go. Your threats aren't going to motivate them. So I'm out of time. I'm going to stop here. All the classes we did last year are online on YouTube. They're available. If you want, email me. I'll send you the list. They're posted by the court system at Wayne County. They're very rough cut. I mean, it basically got online, had the expert do a live Zoom, and judges interrupted and asked questions, and you can see what it was like. We're going to try and professionalize it for this next round and make it more digestible. But the reason I'm doing this is I'm convinced that changing the law isn't going to make a difference. What we need to do is change the people who are making the decisions, equip them to engage the families in a real process of give and take and adjustment. Because there's nothing so powerful as somebody saying and meaning, I believe in you. I have talked with peer parents. 100% of them said that what made the difference for them, somebody in a position of authority, a judge, a lawyer, a social worker, somebody said, I believe in you, and made them feel that they really did. That was the basis. So we're trying to equip the judges to do that. So if you're interested, share what we have. We'll share what we're creating. If you have questions or things that you want, for example, Art to make sure he brings up, I think he's beginning his recording session tomorrow. So we're going to have those online to try and help urban, suburban, and tribal judges, because we need to do better for all the kids. So thank you.